And nobody in the country that knows this message, that spends the time talking about this issue than Mark Mix. Mark was raised in a union household, and he spent 20 years with National Right to Work. He saw the light. He's a regular contributor to the Washington Examiner. Which Examiner? Yeah, Washington Examiner. You see him on Fox News all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Mix.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here with you today. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Senator Mayer, Representative Jones, for your leadership on this issue. My name is Mark Mix. I'm the president of the National Right to Work Committee. We are a 2.5 million member organization headquartered in Springfield, Virginia. Our primary mission in life is to make sure that workers have the right to join a union. But we also believe that workers should have the right to refuse or to withhold their support for a labor union and not be fired simply for withholding that support. It's a very simple concept, ladies and gentlemen, and right to work is going to be a complicated issue over the next couple of weeks in Missouri. But I will tell you, if you look at the bill, a one-page bill, Senate Bill 1, and you read the bill, and you see the impact that it will make on workers in the state of Missouri, you will see that what we're talking about a right to work is really empowering workers to hold union officials accountable to them by giving them the chance to choose whether or not to join or financially support a labor union. It's a very simple concept. But yet there are all kinds of complicated issues, and let me explain why that is. Because first of all, it's very important to understand the power that union officials have been given over workers. And that power goes all the way back to 1935, when Franklin Roosevelt was the President of the United States, and he passed and signed into law what was known then as the Wagner Act. And the Wagner Act took labor management relations from the states where they had resided previously, brought them back to Washington, created a 5-member National Labor Relations Board, and since that time, those 70 years ago, or whatever that is, 70 years ago, 75 years ago, labor management relations have been controlled in Washington, D.C. And from 1935 to 1947, union officials were given this privilege to force people to associate with them. The law said that you must associate with the union, you must be involved with the union. It said you had the right to refrain, but that right to refrain was meaningless because they went on to say that a worker can be compelled to join a union as a condition of getting or keeping a job. Now that's an unbelievable power in the marketplace if we think about it. And from 1935 to 1947, we saw dramatic growth in organized labor strength, and that was probably a good thing for workers. But in 1947, after John L. Lewis, the president of the United Mine Workers, had held the work of those workers out hostage during the war effort, Congress came back and said, you know, we may have gone too far here. So they looked at the legislation, and instead of repealing it, which was on the table, and sending labor management relations back to the states, they said, you know what, we're just going to amend the law. We're going to pass what is known as the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. And part of the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 was an understanding that the power that union officials had over workers was dramatic. That a worker could be the best worker, the worst worker, a middle worker, but if they didn't tender dues or fees to the union would request the employer to have them fired, and the employer had to comply. That's an outrageous power over individual workers. And a power that we in the United States, as we've grown in this experiment of individual freedom, have understood there are certain things that an individual possesses that should never be subject to a vote and should not be allowed to be usurped by an outside source. The idea of freedom of association, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States of America, says you have the right to associate. In order to have the right to associate, ladies and gentlemen, you have to have the right not to associate. The first right can't exist if the corollary right does not exist. But yet, ladies and gentlemen, labor policy and labor management relations in this country, we force workers into unions. We force them to accept the representation in the union, and then we add the burden of saying, not only are you forced to accept the representation, but you got to pay for it. And that's wrong. That's wrong. And that's what right to work is about, as simply and as purely as I can understand it and explain it to you. And I know lots of you got lots of things in your head about what right to work will do or won't do, but ultimately what it will do. And I told Bob this morning, the St. Louis AFL-CIO Labor Trades President, I said, what we believe this will do is make you more accountable to the workers that you claim and want to represent. And if you'll just let the workers choose, and if you'll provide great services for workers, they will come and they will join you. The old story, Field of Dreams, said, if you build it, they will come. Well, unfortunately, for 35 years, union officials, since 1935, union officials have relied on compulsion to bolster their ranks. And this is complete antithesis of what the origins of organized labor were in America. Let's go back to 1900, a man named Samuel Gompers If anyone's ever heard of Samuel Gompers, he was kind of the father of the labor movement in America. And Samuel Gompers knew that workers that were brought together through voluntarism and were held together because people wanted to be members of the union were inherently stronger than unions that would be compelled through compulsion to join. In fact, Samuel Gompers' own words, in 1916, he said, "The workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions in preference to compulsory systems, which are held to be not only impractical, but a menace to their rights, welfare, and liberty." That's the father of the AFL saying that. And if he could look at the debate we're having about right to work, and if he could read Senate Bill 1 by Senator Ridgway, he would understand that exactly the words that he articulated here in 1916 are the words that are in that bill that are pending in Jefferson City today. There's nothing in there about economic growth. There's nothing in there about this negotiation or that negotiation, or the right to have a collective bargaining agreement. Nothing in there about that at all. If you look at it, it defines who an employee association is and says they can compel a worker to pay their dues or fees to keep a job. That's it. Now, obviously, with every piece of legislation, there are implications, and we put meat on the bone for the implications of that legislation. But at its core, right to work is a basic issue of freedom. And I believe the recipe for organized labor becomes stronger in the state of Missouri and stronger across the country is to drop the compulsion that holds them together, that forces people, and only represent the workers that want to be represented by them. It's perfectly legal under the law. Union officials don't admit that. In fact, Bob said that today on the radio station. He said, "Oh, you can force us to represent it." Nonsense. Union officials embrace the opportunity to force you into their collective because it gives them more power. And then, not then, they can say, "Well, gosh, we have to represent these people, and they're getting all these benefits that we negotiate for them, so somehow we got to make them pay for it." Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a discussion about that, and we'll have some time for question and answer. And I know there'll be some questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers for you at the end of this. But let me just finish up a little bit about what right to work will mean. First of all, we established it means basic worker freedom. But let's talk about how that basic worker freedom manifests itself in the marketplace. Because we can study this. We can look at job creation. We can look at per capita income. We can look at statistics. And I will tell you, Bob had a pretty good sheet of statistics down there this morning at the radio station from his studies, and we have our studies. And that's why we need to stick to the core issue of freedom. But let's do talk a little bit about the economic benefits of right to work. Because I believe that freedom works. And I believe that when you give individual workers freedom, they will make good choices. And if they believe that unions can provide them with the best representation and give them a voice in the workplace, they will join. And they will hold union officials accountable and be more focused on the workplace where these workers are actually working and trying to make their livelihoods instead of being out playing politics because the money comes in automatically. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of contractors in the room that would love to have a business model that says everyone has to pay you every month no matter what you do. I'd kind of like to have that, frankly. Sometimes I'm tempted by that power. Not really. But the idea that you can create a forced market for yourself and have this revenue, it obviously creates bad customer service. I believe that, and we see it all the time. The other hat that I wear is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and we do one thing at the Right to Work Foundation. We represent employees only, no employers. We sue lots of employers. We represent employees whose rights have been violated by compulsory unionism. And over the course of our 30-plus year history, we've represented over 500,000 employees, providing free legal aid to exercise their rights. That's been a great privilege, and it's been a great privilege for me to be out there working with these people and helping these people in a very small way to exercise basic rights of freedom. As John mentioned, I came from a union household. My stepfather was a 32-year member of the International Association of Machinists. He was a welder, worked on great big boilers. And I got to tell you, it was very exciting to be involved with all this. I actually was on strike with him in 1976, I believe it was, in Dansville, New York, a company called Foster Wheeler. You can check that if you want. I think there was a picture in a paper of us walking around with signs and things like that. So I understand the plight from the other side, or so-called the other side, or at least what we try to create as being the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the product that we offer with Right to Work, is a great solution to helping the cooperation in the workplace that you must have to create economic growth. I mean, it was Samuel Gompers that also said the best friend that the working man has is a businessman who makes a profit. Because that's what when someone stands up and wants to risk capital and create wealth and create jobs. And the stories in this room, I bet, are just great. Guys with a bucket and a shovel, starting out somewhere, building a business, employing people. And having people that work with you and partner with you to help you do that is an important element of the labor-managed relations. Now, certainly there are always issues that come up in the workplace that need to be talked about, And I am convinced that you, if you're an employee here or a union member, that you found that your union services you well, go ahead and pay them money, pay them dues, pay them your entire paycheck if you believe they're doing good work for you. But don't presuppose that the person working next to you has the same views about his life or what's beneficial to him or what he wants out of life. And don't impose that on him. If he can go out and represent himself and make a better deal or gets a worse deal, at some point he'll make a decision. I can be in the union. And they'll do a great job for him. And I think that's what will happen if union officials take responsibility and only represent those workers that want their representation, instead of forcing workers to pay dues together to keep a job. That was a little bit of a tangent. I wanted to get to some economic issues and talk about right to work's impact and what we think the impact it will have on Missouri. We know first and foremost that this is a difficult time economically for every state. There is trouble across the country. And we're seeing it manifest itself in the cost of government in states like Wisconsin and California and New York and Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately for the country, what's happening in Wisconsin is just the tip of the iceberg. This is going to happen in several more states as we move through the hot months of the summer. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be good. But the fundamental issues are really the same here, and it's about the ability to control the workplace, whether it be in government or the private sector. And I know that word comes with connotations, control. Well, you know, those are those nasty employers that control everything, and they're going to abuse everybody. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if an employer is that nasty and abusing that many people, I guarantee you it won't take long for that business to go out of business. What union officials are saying in Wisconsin, the worst employer on the block right now is who? The most abusive employer in Wisconsin is who? It's the government. It's we the people. Because government really is, in this experiment, this grand experiment, have we the people. And we have empowered union officials in Wisconsin to have power above ordinary citizens to redress their government. And that's the debate we're having right now in Wisconsin. Going back to the private sector and right to work for Missouri, I believe that while it is not a panacea and it's not going to solve all your problems, it would be foolish for me to try to say that to you. I believe that by creating and passing the right to work law, you will create more opportunities than the status quo today. We heard testimony in the Senate hearing from a man who didn't have a position on the issue one way or the other. He was simply a site selection expert. His job is to help companies review incentives and properties and areas where they might want to invest capital and create jobs. And he told the Senate committee that 50% of all businesses looking to relocate or expand and invest money will not even consider Missouri because you don't have a right to work law. Rob Richards, I think he was the chairman of the Economic Development Committee in the House 4 or 5 years ago. He went on a Far East trip to the automakers over in the Far East. He asked them, why don't you come to Missouri? We got great workers here. We got dedicated workers, hard-working folks. And they looked at him and said, we don't want to go to Missouri because you don't have a right to work law. That's unfortunate for opportunities for people in Missouri and hard-working people. You do have just the core, salt-of-the-earth folks here that want to do a good job and they'll work hard for you. But you ought to be considered by all the companies looking to locate and expand and ought to have an opportunity to participate in that growth. And it will happen, ladies and gentlemen. It'll happen in America. We'll get through this and we'll start creating jobs again. We'll start building houses again. We'll start building factories again. I believe that. It's going to happen. Because it's a country founded on basic individual freedom. And I think we're still the beacon to the rest of the world. I know that sometimes it's hard to understand that and believe that. But at the core of our mission in the United States is the protection of individual freedom. And right to work is an extension of that. Unemployment, per capita income. These statistics, we can sit here and talk about. I can talk to you about the automotive industry, for example. We did a study and looked at the analysis. Actually, the New York Times did the study, and we can find it for you. We can produce it for you. From 1995 to 2005 in the automotive industry. In states where there were 10,000 automotive jobs to begin with, a state like Iowa that has 10,000 right-to-work jobs, and a state like Michigan that has 10,000 right-to-work laws. Iowa's a right-to-work state, Michigan is not. Alabama's a right-to-work state. Automotive jobs in right-to-work states increased by 68% during that time period. They dropped by over 35% in the non-right-to-work states. That doesn't mean the jobs went overseas. It meant they went to Alabama, into North Carolina, into Mississippi, into South Carolina. And you know, it was a rare moment when Bob King, who was the president of the United Auto Workers, I think it was the guy right before him, who said, actually, the non-union workers at the Toyota plant in Tennessee make more money than UAW workers in Detroit. A rare moment of candor when he said that. But it's true. It's true. Undeniable. You can look at the UAW press conference if you don't believe me. So what happens is the states that provide opportunities, the basic opportunity of freedom, are also creating opportunities for working men and women. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we ought to do. This is not a confrontation between rank-and-file workers and greedy bosses. This is not a confrontation between the man who thinks someone's taking advantage of him versus someone who thinks they can take advantage of somebody else. This is a partnership between the working people and those that risk capital in the state of Missouri to create opportunities so you can raise your families here. Unfortunately for Missouri, one of the things you're exporting is your young people. And we know that those people are going to right-to-work states. Now, Bob, today, the AFL-CIO building trades guy said it was because of climate. I think there's more to it than that. I think there's more to it than that. It's not just because of air conditioning and right-to-work states are prospering. It's because they're providing opportunities, and they're holding union officials accountable using the rank and file workers they claim to represent. Now, as we move forward in this debate, and I know we want to get questions and certainly want to take any questions on, I'm sure there'll be a rigorous debate here. I hope for that. Because we need to talk this thing through. We need to understand the implications of what it means. But I would encourage you to think, to look at the issue, to read the bill. If those of you in the room who are doubters of right to work would just read the bill. One page, front, back, real simple. Actually, it's a page and a half, I think. I don't think it covers the back of the second page. And to see what actually it will do. It will protect your right to join a union. It will protect your right to have the union represent you. But it would also give that individual who didn't think that might not be beneficial to him the right to choose and not be fired for failure to tender dues to a union. Under current law, that's what happens. If you work in a plant that has a union contract and you don't pay your $35 or $45 or $50 a month in union dues, the union sends a letter to the employer and says, you got to fire Joe. And the employer can say, well, I don't want to fire Joe. He's my best worker. Well, Joe didn't pay his union dues. And if he doesn't pay his union dues and you don't collect it for us and send it to us, Joe's got to be fired. That's the reality here in Missouri. That's the reality in the 27 other states that do not have right-to-work laws. I will tell you this about right-to-work states, for those of you that are concerned about how it affects union membership. And for you people that don't want to hear this, plug your ears right now. But there were 17 states that actually had an increase in the percentage of union members in relation to those employed in 2010. 9 of those states had right-to-work laws. 40% of the states that have right-to-work laws actually had an increase in the percentage of unionized workers compared to employment in their state. Only 28% of the states that have forced unions have had an increase. If you take that data and you extrapolate it and you look forward, if you're a union member or a union steward or a business agent, right-to-work states may be a pretty good place to do business. I will tell you it'll be harder because workers will vote with their pocketbook. And if you're out playing politics and you're out doing things that the workers in your unit don't like, then they will have a recourse and they can vote with their pocketbook. And you'll have to earn their trust back and earn their business back, just like ordinary men and women who are in business every day. You drop customer service for a minute, you lose a customer, and pretty soon, if you continue doing that, you go out of business. Unfortunately for union officials, or unfortunately for us, fortunately for union officials, they have the right to compel forced fees. And that makes their business model a lot different than ours. I thank you for the opportunity. It's been exciting to be in Missouri. We had a good day yesterday. We had lots of debate. Last night I was out in Gascony County speaking to a bunch of folks out there. A couple of iron workers came and we had just a wonderful debate. They asked lots of questions. They had lots of fear. We stood around for about half an hour afterwards and talked with these 3 iron workers. They're great guys. They're hardworking guys. They're trying to take care of their families, freedom in the workplace and voluntary unions. But I have to tell you, what it's allowed me to do, as a boy who was never out of New York State until I was 17 years old, never been more than about 50 miles from my home, I've gotten across the country to be able to talk to people about this issue. I've been to all 48 states, and sometimes I've driven across the country 9 times doing right-to-work business, and I have met really, really great people. And there's a strength in this country that is the reason why people want to still come here, why people invest here, why people think that America is still that beacon. And I will tell you that if we trust their judgment, for the most part, we're doing the right thing. If we try to dictate to them what they have to do and what they need to do and what they should do and what they are forced to do, I think we tamp down the energy that makes not only this state but our country great. I know I'm getting a little bit flowery here in my language because we want to talk about basic issues like right to work, but I consider this to be one of those basic issues. And it's been a privilege for me to help workers across the country, to help small business people across the country, and to do the work that God has given me the gift to do. Given me stewardship responsibility for this day. I will continue to do it with passion. I'm passionate about this, and I know that there are people in Missouri that are passionate about it, and I believe the time is right for Missouri to become the 23rd right-to-work state in America. Thanks for the opportunity, and I don't know how we're going to handle questions, but I would be glad to take it.
become merely fronts with the Democratic Party. And as a Republican, I resent that.
By having the power to force workers to pay them dues or fees, and not really focused on selling and doing customer service for the members they claim to represent, this power has allowed them to go out and play dramatically in the political field. And I will tell you that today, if I was talking to you about right to work in the prospects, I can talk about Indiana and talk about how a Republican governor is the block to a right to work law in Indiana. But from a political standpoint, if you are a union member and you are forced to pay dues, or well, if you're not even a non-member, if you're a forced dues payer, fee payer, and you're in a bargaining unit, they extract money from you. It goes to the union treasury. They also have a PAC operation, which is a voluntary mechanism for unions to raise political money. They do have that. They have their own PACs. They do it the right way through the law. But they come back and they go to the general treasury account, the checkbook, and they say, okay, we're going to do voter registration drives, phone banks, get out the vote efforts, we're going to do mailings, we're going to do lit drops, we're going to have rallies. They can use general treasury money to pay for that political activity. And what happens for the workers in that unit that are compelled to pay those fees are being used for political activities which they may oppose. Now, Thomas Jefferson said that to compel a man to propagate ideas which he opposes is sinful and tyrannical. But yet compulsory unionism has manifested itself in just that sinful and tyrannical behavior where workers are forced to support ideas and causes they may oppose, and their only choice is either defend their political rights and give up their workplace rights, or keep their workplace rights and give up their political rights. That's a Hobson's choice that no worker should be forced to have to make. We had a case in 1988 called the Beck decision.
In 1978, Missouri was the fourth most unionized state in the nation, and we defeated right to work. Today, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 1983, 36.6% of manufacturing jobs were union shops. The number dropped to 21.8% in the year 2000. And in the year 2010, the number dropped to 9.9%. Mark, what we see here in this Bureau of Labor Statistics is a drop in organized labor within our state. But accordingly, that's a 26.7% drop. We are also losing, and I'd like to expound on this, we're also losing that much manufacturing in
We
my
have to create something and have people invest money. And what I think what we're hearing and what we heard at the Senate committee hearing and what we know of right to work through other studies is that companies looking to do that, to expand, just won't consider Missouri. And that's unfortunate. That's one of the elements of the impact of the right to work that the right to work law will have. And unfortunately, I'm not happy with those numbers. No one's happy with those numbers. But you have to look around for reasons. And one thing that capital will do, and this may sound cold and calculated, but capital will go where someone can make a profit. I mean, every time you invest $1, if you're going to invest $1, you expect to have some return on that dollar. And you need to be, if you can't make that return on the dollar, there's no reason to invest that dollar. And I don't want to reduce it to the actual, just the pure profit motive, but those are considerations that people make. And they know if they can get a more cooperative workplace. And right-to-work states have demonstrated that cooperation to a higher level than forced union states. I think you have the ability to attract manufacturing jobs back here. But, we're down to a point where America has got 6.9% of private sector workers in unions. We now have, believe it or not, we have more government union members in America than we have private sector union members in America. And that really is a compelling story for what is ahead. I think union officials understand that their final frontier is growing government. They realize the revenue stream that is created from government is probably their most effective stream. I found out just the other day up in Michigan that the largest United Auto Workers local is a local of government employees. It's not even automotive manufacturer workers anymore. It's government employees. There's no real perfect and complete solution for this. I think what you need to do is study this and look at what things you can do to finish the puzzle of making Missouri more attractive to capital investment, new job creation, expansion, and job growth. And I think right to work is part of that puzzle. Absolutely.
Mark, as you know, many of us in the construction industry are either potential victims or actual victims of top-down organizing campaigns, where the union just tries to force the owner of a business to sign a union agreement without even consulting the workers. how would a right-to-work law in Missouri affect our own facilities?
The success rate for unions in what are known as secret ballot means certification elections has dropped precipitously over the last several years. In fact, in 2008, I believe it was, 80% of all new union members were unionized and certified through what is known as a card check agreement. And for many of you who follow politics in Washington, you know we had a pretty significant fight over the last 2 years over a bill that said was card check legislation, which imposed a new mechanism, not a new mechanism, it's already legal to accept cards to certify a union in the workplace, but it would have imposed card check as the only means of certifying a worker, virtually eliminating the secret ballot elections. Under current labor law, when 30% of the workers in a unit petition the National Labor Relations Board for a union election, the NLRB will review that petition, and they will determine that it's accurate, and they will contact the employer, who heretofore may not have known that there was a union organizing drive going on, and they'll say, we have received a petition from your workers, and we are going to come to your workplace and conduct a union election. That generally happens between 45 and 50 days. And when the NLRB comes in, conducts the election, and it's by secret ballot, and the union wins 50% of those voting, then they represent everybody in the workplace. Well, the number of union elections has dropped dramatically over the years because union officials have not been that successful winning those elections. So what they tried to do is they tried a little different campaign called a top-down organizing campaign, where instead of going after the workers and trying to convince them to sign the petition and sign cards, they'll go to an employer and they'll start putting pressure on the employer. And they'll use outside forces to know his banking relationship. They'll go after him socially at his associations and groups, and they'll pick it in front of his customers and say that, or her customers, and say this gal is a bad gal and she's not doing a great job and you need to drop her as a supplier, et cetera, et cetera. And the logical reaction of the small business person is to call up the union guy and say, what's going on here? What's happening? Well, we want to organize your workers, and we want to make sure that you're on board, and we're going to make it. We're just going to continue to stay after you until you agree to allow us to represent your workers. And sometimes employers say, okay, no problem. What do I have to do? And they say, well, you just agree to what is called a neutrality agreement. You don't say anything about union organizing. You give us the names and addresses of all your employees. You let us come onto your property. These demands vary from place to place. You let us come onto your property, talk with your employees, and when we get the requisite number of cards, 50% plus one signed, we'll present them to you, and you will agree to certify us as the union. Under current law, the only person that can request a secret ballot election in labor policy is the employer. Employees have no rights to request a secret ballot election. If the employer gets a certification or a petition with 30% of the people signed, he can say, okay, I recognize the union right there. And there is no secret ballot election. The card check bill was designed to make that the primary mechanism for certifying unions. So the corporate campaign became much more effective because by putting pressure from the top down, you get the employer to agree to say nothing and just accept the card. Then you've won the battle as soon as you have the ability to get the card signed. It was a union official from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union said, employees are unpredictable, and we can't really predict what they're going to do, but employers are predictable. So we don't organize employees, we organize employers. Well, we had a case where some employees of the Dana manufacturing plant came to us, and they were unionized by the United Auto Workers in what was a neutrality agreement with Dana. Dana said, no problem, come in, you can unionize them. Well, a lot of the employees said, we didn't want the union. And so the National Labor Relations Board ruled in 2007, in a case where we provide legal aid for these employees, and said, if these employees are unionized through a card check agreement and with the neutrality agreements in place, the workers have 45 days to have a secret ballot election. They can actually request it. The employees can request a secret ballot election. They did, and they threw the union out after they actually got behind the curtain and voted, their conscience. It was a very difficult thing, but they did. And that decision at the NLRB is going to be overturned here shortly. In a matter of months, there's 5 or 6 cases that have been set up by the board that will overturn it. So we'll go back to this neutrality card check situation where workers won't have any voice to actually request an election or have a secret ballot when it comes to union certification. But the corporate campaigning in the construction industry, particularly one of the most interesting campaigns, is the so-called salting campaign, where the union hires organizers. They're actually being paid by the union. They go to your place of business and they fill out a job application, and sometimes they'll write on there, I'm a union organizer for Bricklayers Local 2. And sometimes an employer says, I don't want to hire that guy. It's making problems for me. And so if you say, we don't want to hire you, then the union comes back and files an unfair labor practice charge against you for anti-union animus, and then that starts a legal process. If you do hire them, then they're actually agents of 2 people. They're your employee, but they're also still being paid by the union in most cases as an agent of the employee. And then they get inside and they start to create an organizing drive on your nickel, if you will, by paying. And then sometimes what happens is they'll get enough contacts done, and then they'll start saying, okay, now fire me. And they'll say, well, I was organizing a union and you fired me, and then unfair labor practice charges come from that end. And so small contractors, particularly in the electrical contractor and HVAC contractor, have been subjected to this assaulting campaign. And unfortunately, it's perfectly legal. I mean, they could do that. The courts have ruled that that's actually legal. But another issue where, again, union officials have that kind of power.
I hear the negative comment that I hear the most when we start to talk about the right to work. In fact, I heard it at the dinner table last night at my in-laws. Yeah, it's pretty
You
bad.
don't want to argue there.
His comment, my father-in-law's comment last night was, if this goes through, it's just a matter of time, we're all going to be working for $10 an hour with no benefits. And in fact, one of my boys inside that works in the office with us, I've got a skeleton crew of guys that came up out of Texas. And he says, we've been right to work there, and because of that, we can't make wages to feed our families, and there's no insurance, no benefits. And
So, as far as the wage issue, that is a really compelling fear that is out there, and you'll see the signs and the bumper stickers, right to work class. I think there's one on the actually right to work is a ripoff is out in the parking lot right now. But the notion of the wage issue is something that we can debate, and as I mentioned earlier, the statistics go inside. Here's what we know. What we know is when you compare union and non-union wages, and you adjust for cost of living, which is a reasonable way to compare a plumber in New York City with a plumber in Provo, Utah. You take the cost of their living, their apartment costs, their food costs, their transportation costs, all those things, and you use a mechanism that economists use all the time called the Metropolitan Statistical Analysis, and you can actually compare a meaningful comparison between New York City and Provo, Utah by using a cost of living adjustment. So I think we would all agree that a plumber in New York City makes probably a lot more than a plumber in Provo, Utah. I think that's a given. Now, if we just look at that from the difference between New York City and Provo, Utah, and you don't adjust for cost of living, absolutely, you can make the case that union members make more in the plumbing business than non-union members. But if you take the opportunity to use a mechanism that allows you to compare all of the elements of the cost of living and what those wages buy in a state that has a right to work law, we found that workers in right-to-work states have about $4,400 more in disposable income on an annual basis than their brothers and sisters in the forced unionism states. I mean, this was done by a guy by the name of Gary Paulson, who was the former president of the North American Economics and Analysts Association. He published a study, did the cost of living index based on 2004 data, and came out with the number of 4,400. The Nobel Prize winning economics department at George Mason University did a study. They've done it twice or 3 times now, and they see that the cost of living difference in right-to-work versus non-right-to-work states as being about $2,300 to $2,700 difference. People in right-to-work states having more money to spend. The notion of the benefits and the notion of the wages is something that comes out of this that I believe, let me just say this, it may not be an immediate solution because of the quote-unquote injustice of someone underpaying or not paying benefits, but I believe, with all my fiber, that an employer that wants to produce a good product and wants to invest his money will actually spend the time to make sure that he has the workers that he needs to expand his business or to grow his business or actually just do his business. And I don't think there's any employer in America that's ever gotten ahead by abusing their employees consistently and constantly. Because our system in the private sector allows for other entries to come into the marketplace. And if you find out that a particular company is doing this bad business and they're not taking care of their employees, and it won't happen tomorrow, it may take a year or 2 to have a substitute come into the marketplace and provide better customer service and take care of their workers better and create a better environment, workers will move to the company that's actually doing that. I think it's a natural thing for a business. We think, oh, well, they can just keep abusing this for ad infinitum, forever. No, that's not the way it works. Businesses are shuttered because of that. So while I don't have any great recipe for the differences and we don't have any benefits, that's one of the interesting compelling arguments with this whole Wisconsin fight. In Virginia, in 1993, with a Democrat governor, we signed a bill. There was a bill passed and signed into law that said the state of Virginia will not recognize unions to negotiate for public employees. Everyone can join a union. There are really good unions, particularly our firefighters union in Virginia. Very strong, very powerful. They have a great voice in the legislature. They're active in politics. They've got a great program. Firefighters from across the Commonwealth join them, and they put out their great yellow and black signs. They do great work. Not one member, first of all, is compelled to join them and is forced to pay dues. Everyone's joining voluntarily, which makes them stronger. But in the state government, we have employees, believe it or not, without union contracts in Virginia that actually get a paycheck. We have employees that actually get an insurance plan. We have employees that actually get retirement benefits. How can that happen? How does that happen? How does any business, the 93% of the businesses in the private sector that are not unionized, how do they pay people? Do they have insurance? Do they have any plans at all? Of course they do. Of course they do. 93% of the companies, the private sector businesses in America are doing business without a union contract. Workers are still getting paid. They still have benefits. They still have insurance. And the employer has a responsibility to make sure that the environment's good enough that the employees will stay. If I'm your best employee and you're not paying me, and I'm confident in what I'm doing, I believe there's other opportunities out there for myself. But whether or not we force workers into unions or give them the choice to join a union, I think it's a long stretch to say that it manifests itself that way. Because if workers really want to improve if they think that by joining a union, they're really going to improve their wages and benefits, join the union. Do it freely. Do it voluntarily. Solve the problem that way. Next question. Are we doing
I was hoping you can kind of expand on the definition of collectively bargaining. Like, I have an understanding of it. I also want you to answer whether you think it's a good idea to give power to private sector unions to collectively bargain. Whether you think it's a good or bad idea for public sector unions to have the right to collectively bargain. Because I think FDR kind of talked about the destructiveness.
between the private sector and the public sector? This is a legitimate debate that's going on right now. And, there are those in Wisconsin who are claiming these rights, everything's a right, gotta have these rights. But as the questioner commented, and I talked a little bit about 1935 when the private sector labor management relations were brought back to Washington. During that period, FDR got a letter from a government worker and said, look, we're doing this for the private sector, why don't we do it for the government sector as well? Why don't we just allow for bargaining and unionization and all that stuff and mandate it and all that? And FDR wrote back a letter and saying, to think that we can apply the private sector model to the government sector just can't work. Government, by definition, provides necessary services, and to allow the possibility that those services would be withheld is unthinkable and intolerable. That's what FDR said. In 1955, George Meany, the president of the AFL, when asked a similar question, said, you can't organize the government. You can't negotiate with the government, because government provides what are, by definition, necessary services. And so we grant government a monopoly over certain things. We grant government a monopoly of force. They're the one institution that our founding documents say can actually use force to compel us to do things. To apply a model where you have this confrontational bargaining model to the public sector is really completely unapplicable. And that's why in Virginia we did what we did. And I think it's 29, 30 states have some form of bargaining, but 20 states don't, and they still get their job done. So your point about the difference between the private sector and the public sector is extremely well taken. And there is a large difference, and the model does not apply to the public sector. And we're going to learn that lesson again. That's where these fights are going to be over the next several years. As the growth in government, the size of government, the cost of government has been exposed by the downturn in the economy. Great question. Thank you. I have really imposed on your time.
An obligation upon the union to provide representation for non-union members. Is there, in whatever, they don't pay dues or anything, of course, they could be employed without being union members, but there they have the union representation to get the same benefits, blah, 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 blah. That seems outrageous.
Labor officials asked for and provided the right to exclusive monopoly representation. Has anyone negotiated a union contract here? Anyone negotiated one? Okay. Well, one of the provisions that is a mandatory subject of bargaining, and when the union is actually voted and certified, they are certified as the single voice, the single bargaining unit to talk to the employer about the employees. There's nobody else who can come in and do that. They have an exclusive monopoly right to represent all the employees in the bargaining unit. Now let's take hypothetically, let's say that these people all voted for the union, these people all voted no. There's one more person over here that voted for the union, so this side wins. These people are now subject to union representation, even though they voted no, didn't ask for the union, because of what is known as exclusive representation. Interestingly enough, one of the things union officials won't tell you, and we're providing this information to legislators right now, is a legal brief that the Steelworkers Union filed in 2006, and then the 6 unions of the Change to Win conglomerate filed in 2007, that said there's a dirty little secret in American labor law, and that is that union officials only have to represent the workers that actually join them and want their representation. But there are very few. I think there are probably, I can count on one hand the number of contracts where union officials come in and say, we don't want to deal with anybody that doesn't want us. They come in and say, we want to be the exclusive bargaining agent for all workers. And so this employee that voted no, in order to talk to this employer has to talk to me. That employer can't talk to this employee, even though he voted no, didn't ask for the union. The only way he can talk to her now is through me. And the only way he can have agreements is through me. These two can't get together and say, hey, this is wrong, we need to fix this, because they have exclusive monopoly bargaining. We asked organized labor to give up that right in a bill introduced in 1993 in the United States Congress. You know who the first person who fought against it was? Lane Kirkland, AFL-CIO president. Because he knows the only reason they can ask for forced dues is to maintain their exclusive monopoly privilege over all the workers in a bargaining unit. They won't give it up.
Okay, so this means that this is a federal law, in fact, and it was something that was created by the union.
They lobbied for it, they got it passed.
So right to work does not change that,
That's right.
but it does not impose it either.
Well, what happens is
It's being imposed elsewhere.
these workers that have chosen not to join the union are still compelled to accept the representation of the union, but they don't have to pay for it now. They still have to give their right to representation. They created an agency doctrine without any consideration, without any meeting of the minds, and certainly under duress. But now the actual injustice is they overlay the forced payment of dues on these people now. And who are we to suppose and to surmise what's beneficial to Matt here and beneficial to her? We can't sort that out. We can't sort that out. We shouldn't be in a position to sort that out. Workers will decide that for themselves.
So what right to work would then do would be these guys would be able to not, no wait, now I.
They wouldn't be forced to pay fees to keep their jobs.
They would not be.
Even though they would
forced to
still
pay
be
fees.
subject to the union's bargaining agreement.
But they're still subject to that idea that the
Exactly.
union is the only way that can be changed is basically to change that federal law.
That's right, and we tried that in 1993. Dick Armey was the sponsor of the bill. Eddie Mine knows Dick Armey well back there. We tried it, and Lane Kirkland was the first guy to come running out. This is an attack on workers. No, it was empowering workers to say, look, here's what happens to organized labor. If they will just represent.
Currently, that what you're saying is, right now, the unions come in, they bring in a contract, they say, okay, we have exclusive representation over everyone. If right to work were to pass, then this group over here, who did not vote for the union, could choose to not pay fees to the union. But that right now, the union still has to represent them. But if I understood correctly, you're saying that the union can choose not to represent them. And so that if there's still an exclusive bargaining agreement.
I mean, it's what's known as minority bargaining. The union can choose to represent only those members or only those workers that want to be there. However, in order to get this half of the room, get their money, they choose what's called monopoly bargaining. They choose exclusive representation. It is a choice of the unions. And in fact, as I understand it, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, prior to 1960, a lot of minority bargaining went on.
There is a history of it a little bit.
There is a history of it. So it has existed. The law recognizes it. The unions don't want to tell you that because they don't want to admit they have that choice. And that's the argument they use. Why should this half of the room get free services? There's services you don't want. The example that was used in the Senate is you land at St. Louis Lambert Airport. Your car's in long-term parking. There's a taxi right there in front. The guy in the taxi grabs your luggage, throws you in the taxi and drives you home, and then says, I need $50 for the taxi ride. The guy said, hey, my car was there. I didn't want a taxi ride. Too bad. That's the type of situation that unions exist. You pay for it whether you want it or not. One word sums this up, freedom. What it's all about. It does not kill unions. The sky does not fall. It doesn't change union organizing. Any last questions? Okay, with that, we do have some donations.